Morning all, let's continue the very interesting Capablanca backfire series, and in this game I think not castling soon enough is demonstrated as backfiring by Capablanca. His opponent is Christoph Schroeder. It's in New York 1916, so Christoph Schroeder kicked off with e4 and we enter into this variation, the two knights variation, because Capablanca now plays knight f6, not very originally named, both knights are out. Now knight g5, very aggressive move. d5 is the most common response to shield f7, but now after e takes d5 there's a few very interesting moves that can be played. Capablanca chose avoided knight takes d5, and there's a temptation for players to do that, but it invites this kind of fried liver attack with knight takes f7, which can be very, very dangerous for black. There's some options here though to consider. b5 is an option, knight d4, even knight b4, but one of the main original options is actually knight a5. This is the most popular option here, to just attack that bishop and to gambit a pawn. So black now is playing a gambit. Is there enough compensation here? We see bishop b5 check. This is the most standard move. c6, white takes, black takes, and now the bishop usually drops back to e2, which is what happened in this game. Black usually now kicks this knight immediately, because the e4 square might be useful for white if given an extra move. So to avoid the knight going to e4, if it's ever protected there. So the knight's either got two main options here, knight h3 or knight f3. Knight f3 is the main one. Now e4 is the main move again. So far, from a modern opening theory perspective, Capablanca is playing this gambit exceptionally well and in a standard way. Now, slight deviation. The most common is actually bishop d6 overall. Capablanca chose actually queen c7. And now white, in theory, in practice, usually plays d4 here to support that knight. In this game, we see f4. This is more rarely played. It slightly weakens the king side, moving the f pawn rather than the centre pawn. The centre pawn would have the advantage of also liberating the bishop. Here, this f4 could potentially even block in the bishop. But actually, we see now, instead of bishop d6 leaving that pawn on f4, Capablanca actually decided to play e takes f3, and we'll put on a Kibitzer here. I think at this stage, after knight takes f3, it's about equal actually. What has Capablanca got for the gambit? Well, bishop d6 seems to imply that there is some dark square pressure to be worried about, and things like knight g4. It looks as though this diagonal is sensitive. But it is actually technically possible here, it seems, for white to castle. If white just castles here, he might even be able to look forward to this semi-open f file later. Say black castles, knight c3. There's no immediate problem. It would seem in this sort of position. It would seem about equal. If black really tried to exploit this diagonal with, say, knight g4, I think just h3 will be sufficient to kick the knight. There's always d4 in response to a check. So, any check, we just play d4. It's no big deal there, it would seem. So, for some reason, I think white was trying to be a bit too clever now. He played d4, and now black castles. And here again, if white castles, it doesn't seem as though there's a huge major issue with doing this, except perhaps c5 is looking like black's going to have nice pieces. The bishop's got the option to come over here. The dark squares are trying to be softened up here. So say d5, black would actually be potentially in very, very good shape here, with good compensation, good active pieces, good bishops. It looks like an interesting position. But white again was perhaps trying to be a little bit too clever, and trying to maybe get rid of this bishop from the diagonal and gain space on the queen side with this next move, c4. Now, in fact, Black might have at least a couple of good moves, but I think Capablanca chose the very strongest move here, which is the refusal basically to move this bishop back. He anticipates perhaps c5, which will be asking the bishop either to step back or go to f4, where it could be swapped off. But Capablanca now makes use of this battery in this position. He actually does play knight g4. So it looks as though h2 is under fire. Bishop takes h2 in particular could be quite dangerous, because that would mean that the queen could be coming to g3 later. White here now just plays queen d3. So is this a very clever move from White? Well, I think Black has some good moves now. If bishop takes h2, that's not so good. I think White could end up cleverly using the h file, say knight takes, and a move like g3, say, that will actually block the knight, and it's going to be forced to go to g4, bishop f4, and actually White isn't in such bad shape here at all. So maybe this is one of the cheeky ideas of not castling so quickly to try and tempt Capablanca to win a pawn like that. But instead, Capablanca plays a different move, a very strong move, rook e8. And now, of course, there is a problem that castling does neglect h2. Castling here is now clearly a mistake because bishop takes h2, and there isn't any such compensation. The bishop, if knight takes, queen takes, of course, is mate. But if in this position, bishop f4, and Black is doing very, very nicely indeed. You know, the h file is not being used. The dark square bishop hasn't been lost or anything. So this is very, very good there. So in this position, actually, White now plays knight c3. And can you spot what Capablanca played now to punish the White king still being in the center? So if I give you 10 seconds starting from now, what would you play with Black? Okay. Now, Capablanca avoided taking the h2 pawn. Let's have a quick look again. In this particular position, knight takes h2, knight takes, bishop takes. This is some compensation for White because of that h-file pressure. It looks as though if White can even try and castle queen sides, this could actually rebound on Black. So no, he still doesn't want to take that pawn in this particular position. Instead, he plays actually bishop g3 check. So offering a whole bishop here. This is taken. It's not very nice to play something like king f1 because knight f2 would actually fork queen and rook. And it seems unpalatable to move the king, really. King d1, knight f2 check wins the queen. Anything else, knight f2. So this is actually taken. And now Capablanca plays queen takes g3 check. So if king f1, we've got queen f2 mate. So the king now actually goes, if it goes to d1, then White loses the queen. Knight f2 check, forking king and queen. So has to go to d2. And here is a very, very clever point of the combination, actually, that now knight f2 is forking queen and rook. And what can white actually do here? And you might think, is it just about winning the rook? Not necessarily. Say the queen tries to get out of the way to b1, then actually even stronger than taking the rook might be just taking on c4 first. So say bishop takes, queen f4 check, and then we get this mighty skewer with bishop f5, and we can play this check to get the queen out of harm's way and win white's queen. So that would be totally unacceptable. White is actually in very, very big trouble though, in any case. Now, so after king d2, knight f2, it seems well, white is in a lost position. He tries actually just rook h3, and this just allows bishop takes h3, still attacking the queen, and white now resigned. So Capablanca played quite a fierce gambit to this early knight g5, and I think a lot of games have this variation. It's popular at lower and intermediate, sometimes intermediate levels, this variation. So it's an important gambit to be aware of that Capablanca played here. d5 to shield f7, and then this idea of knight a5 is actually one of the most popular responses nowadays. It's tried and tested, this gambit. So it got black a lot of pressure, a lot of dark square pressure in particular, and white just took too long to castle and was drastically punished. Hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.